In the spring of 2017, I had one of the great pleasures of my life, and that I was able to visit the island of Iona, tiny little island off the coast of Scotland. Some of you I have been here as well, and Maggie Scott is especially fond to talk about Iona. So if you want to know more, you can ask her or me. Iona is this charming, almost ethereal place where the sea always looks bright turquoise, and the grass seems somehow greener there than anywhere else. More than any other place I've ever set foot, Iona feels like a thin place where the veil between this world and the divine is very thin. You don't really have to concentrate to pray in Iona. It feels like you close your eyes and God's right there. It's a beautiful place. And sometimes I wonder if one of the reasons it's so special is because there's more sheep than people on that island. No, really. There are less than 200 people, around 170, that live there full time, and over 1,000 sheep. Nothing against people, but it's very quiet on Iona, mostly. Those hairy cows and wild geese, and yes, the sheep actually make a lot of noise, but it's not the racket that humanity tends to make. It's very peaceful, just nature sounds. And living there, where there are more sheep than people, even just for a week like I did, I started thinking that perhaps life was a lot more simple than I had been led to believe. And we have to talk about sheep today. The lectionary was not going to let us get around it. Between the prayers and the scripture reading, we will hear the word shepherd 10 separate times. Psalm 23, the most familiar psalm in the world, begins with those words, "The Lord is my shepherd." And in the gospel, Jesus takes that identity for himself. I am the good shepherd. There's something about this metaphor of a tender of sheep that somehow is pointing us to God. But I'm willing to bet that most of us have never been a shepherd, needed a shepherd, or even spent much time around sheep. In this day and age, in this particular part of the world, we don't have to rely on sheep to make our own clothing or on meat to survive. So the metaphor of a shepherd as a symbol for God is a little hard for most of us to access. What is it about being a shepherd that points us to God? Most of us have seen the sweet icons of Jesus as a shepherd. Normally, this is a smiling, kind-faced Jesus with flowing hair and sun shining on his face and a tender little lamb draped over his shoulders. It seems like a very tender image of Jesus, the good shepherd. But we have never been shepherds, especially not in ancient times, so the way we hear it is probably very different than the way they heard it. There's a few things you should know about sheep and shepherds. First of all, you may know sheep are not very smart. That's why they need a shepherd. They are simple, gentle creatures, and they are very easily terrified. They don't see very well, which is one of the reasons they need a shepherd to guide them through the gates when they're getting put in their pen, or they need to follow each other. And if you grab one, it is likely to scream and panic and flail around. And that gives the parable of the lost sheep a much different connotation. That lost sheep was probably not excited to be grabbed at first. That lamb that we picture gently draped over Jesus' shoulders is probably an unrealistic image. More than likely, that lamb would be wriggling and squirming and trying to get away. Shepherds were also thought of differently in the time the Psalms were written than when the gospel was written. Many of the Psalms are attributed to the great King David. And before he was anointed king, what was he? A shepherd boy. So for a while, shepherds had this very noble connotation. It's a peaceful life, tending the sheep, and one of them became the great king. But eventually the tribes of Israel migrated to Egypt, and in Egypt, shepherds were despised. Sheep were not really valued for food or even ritual sacrifice. So Egypt was really an agricultural society, a farming society, so they really looked down on shepherds. Shepherds had less of a connection to the land and more connection to their herd. And this rivalry, shepherd versus farmer, is actually a long-standing one. If you think about it, the very first murder we have is a farmer murdering a shepherd. Cain murdering Abel because God favored Abel's offering of his best lamb. The low rank of shepherds continued on for centuries, well into Jesus' time. And in ancient Palestine, shepherds were just as despised as tax collectors. They were not anywhere near the top of society. They were at the bottom rung. They were considered unclean. And this adds another layer to Jesus identifying himself as the good shepherd. How strange for God's Son to say, I am like these people, like the shepherds, and they are like me. How strange for God's Son to say something like that. In these times, it might be similar to Jesus saying, I am the good trash collector. I take away what you no longer need. It sounds weird, and that's probably how it sounded back then. For this respected teacher to identify himself like a shepherd. Sheep are also tasty prey to other animals, which means a shepherd job was not without risk. And Jesus does allude to this, saying a shepherd may lay down his life for his sheep to protect them from the wolf. And this was also probably a ridiculous concept to Jesus' listeners. It's not a very sound business model to risk your life to die for your herd. Who else will take care of the sheep if you die? It doesn't make sense. But to Jesus, the hired hand doesn't care for the sheep, but the shepherd does. It's that care, that irrational, ridiculous level of love that makes Jesus' idea of a shepherd different and special. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That's the way most of us have memorized it. Other translations say this: Yahweh is my shepherd, I have all that I need. Or God is my shepherd, there is nothing I lack. Because ultimately the shepherd is everything to the sheep. The shepherd gives safety and comfort and love, keeps them fed and sheared and shows them where to go, takes them to the grasses and the still waters. The Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need. Maybe we think of ourselves as that sweet little lamb draped over Jesus' shoulder, obedient and happy to be held. But more often than not, I think we are more like the screaming, frantic, lost sheep flailing around, desperate to go our own way. Maybe we are focused on getting more money, more power, more, even though with the Good Shepherd, we have all that we could ever need: safety, community, love. The Lord is my shepherd. There is nothing I lack. The Good Shepherd knows his own, and his own sheep know him. And even those sheep that aren't yet in the fold belong to the Good Shepherd, and they will listen to his voice. John writes, "The good shepherd laid down his life for the sheep, and in return we must lay down our lives for each other. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down their life for a friend." And as a little girl, I used to read this passage and wonder if I needed to risk or even die trying to rescue people from danger in order to show that great love. Is that what it would take to be like Jesus? Certainly there are many heroes in the world, and some in this room who have done so, and I'm so thankful for them. Yet the language is so specific. Jesus doesn't say die, but lay down your life. This is such a deliberate image, to lay down your life. No greater love hath no one than this, than to lay down one's life for a friend. I'm starting to think that Jesus wasn't asking us to die for each other. He took care of that himself, dying for the world and rising again to break the chains of death for all creation. So we didn't have to do that. Instead, I think Jesus was asking us to live for each other. The Lord is our shepherd. We have all that we need. That frees us up to live each day deliberately, to be like lowly, humble shepherds, and lay down our lives for the sake of our neighbors. And today is a good day as any to start.